Time to go. All right, it's time to go. We're starting. Welcome, guys. Welcome. Chris Sandeman here from Sandeman's New Europe. This is my second ever live streaming free walking tour. But like I have said before to you guys, if you were here yesterday with us on our first one, I had the dubious honor of being the first ever historical free walking tour guide. And it all started right here in Berlin back in 2003. So it's time for us to try something new and be able to reach out to you when you're not able to come to us. Berlin this week and next week or the week after, I'll be heading to London. We'll start looking to open up free live streaming walking tours there and expanding throughout the 20 cities that we work throughout our network, and then beyond and beyond and beyond from there. So if you haven't been on a free walking tour before, let me just tell you really quickly how that works. The whole idea about these tours is that we want to try to create as much access and accessibility as we possibly can, which is why they're free. They're on a tips-only basis. And if by the end of this tour, I'm able to convince you guys that it's actually worth paying for, then you can go and hit our donate button that's going to be somewhere in this like magical space down below. For all you folks who tried so desperately to donate with PayPal yesterday and didn't work, really sorry about that. Like I said, technical difficulties. We might have technical difficulties today too. We don't know. We're playing it by ear. We're learning as we're going right now, and it means so much to me that you're able to be so patient. Oh God, all of the wonderful, lovely comments from people that I haven't seen in years or heard from in a decade in the comments from yesterday meant the world to me, and I was really incredibly touched by it. So thank you so much. If you were here yesterday, please just give me a thumbs up right now. Just let us know that you're a repeat, you're coming back. It helps us know what's working and what's not working. If it is your first time joining us, as in you weren't here yesterday, then let me know where you're from. That's what we've decided as a way to try to get a feeling for who you are, and lets me know what to talk about. The reality of it is that I've got like this much Berlin knowledge in my head, and I can only talk about like this much of it during our 30 minutes together. So it helps a lot to try to pitch the tour to you guys, my audience right now, to give what you really want. And hopefully what you really want right now is to learn about the Museum Island, which is right over here on the other side of this big old river, the River Spree. Now, the Spree River is the reason why Berlin ends up here. It's why these Slavic folks who come to Berlin, Berlin, the swamp city, they come here because of this waterway. And it's also why the Christian knights will end up moving up here in the 14th century. They also want this area for themselves. They kick the pagans out, they take over, because it's a great place to be able to trade from and build a city. We're actually really close to where the original center of Berlin is. We're to the west, we're to the east of where the Brandenburg Gate was yesterday. And well, we're going to cross over onto Museum Island. What you can see at the very end and top of the Museum Island over there, with the kind of round cupola, that red flag floating in front of it, is the Bode Museum. The Bode Museum, excuse me, the Bode Museum. Bode Museum is a museum holding collections of Byzantine art, and also a huge coin collection as well, which is really interesting. In front of that, behind that red and that yellow crane, you can see the top of the Pergamon Museum. We're going to talk about the Pergamon once we get onto Museum Island and all the treasures and wonders that are in there. You can already see the glass top of it, which lets a lot of natural sunlight down into the gorgeous installation down below. And this kind of rose-colored, red-colored building there is the Old National Gallery, the Alte Nationalgalerie. 17th, 18th century painters strewn throughout there. And you can see already a guy on a horse in front of it. We're going to get a better look at him later on as well, because he's an important player for us to chat about. See all these Doric columns on the other side, which we're also going to be able to walk underneath, which is really exciting. Now, once we cross over onto Museum Island and talk about that, we'll eventually make our way to the other side of Museum Island. You guys were giving me some great feedback already in the comments saying, Chris, we'd really like to know where we're going to be going and where we're going to be ending up on this tour. The answer is, we're going to cross over the Museum Island onto the Linden, the old Royal Boulevard. which we started our tour yesterday on the other end of, and then we're going to head over to ultimately the Bebelplatz, where the book burning took place in 1933 on May 10th. But for now, we're going to cross over the Friedrichsbrücke, the Frederick's Bridge. This bridge was named after none other than Frederick the Great, Frederick II. We're going to see a statue of him as well later on, which is pretty cool. But originally, this bridge, built in 1703, was just wooden planks. It was the bridge to Pomeranz. But in the late 1800s, they built this raised bridge. You can see a bit of that old raised bridge still here, in this dark colored kind of bridgehead, if you will. But you'll notice that the rest of the bridge doesn't look anywhere near as old as that. That's because most of this bridge was built in 1981 and then renovated again after 2000, the 2010s. The bridge was actually blown up, ironically, by the Wehrmacht, by the Nazi army during the end of World War II to prevent Russian soldiers from being able to cross over it, which is pretty cool. And then it's rebuilt, like I said, in the 1980s. This is great. I remember 17 years ago when I used to come and do tours here, there was a guy that would always hang out on this bridge, and he'd be playing the saxophone, and he was so good. He was this amazing saxophone player, and he was such a cool dude, because every time I'd come through the tour, he'd always like give me a little nod and a smile, and he'd stop playing sax for a second, so that way I could like just talk to my group as I crossed over. And then I'd always like encourage people to go hook him up and help support artists and whatnot. And these guys coming out and doing this warms my heart, because it provides this like natural background music for us as we come and explore history together. Super, super cool stuff. All right, so as we were saying, we're heading over here under these Doric columns into this colonnade. And as we do, we're going to see something a lot like we saw yesterday at the Brandenburg Gate with those 100,000 bullet holes. Now there, they'd fixed up all those bullet holes. But here today, we're going to see lots of places where they haven't repaired the bullet holes. And it just shows what happens when you're not the Brandenburg Gate. They leave the holes, right? So these aren't some weird kind of stone-pecking German stone peckers or something like that. It's a reminder of the hand-to-hand combat which was taking place here in 1945. As just 40,000 German soldiers, many of them having seen too few winters, little kids, or too many winters, old men, were called back out to try to defend the city from this onslaught of first Russian artillery and then a super professional trained Russian army who was racing to take Berlin, because Stalin had said whichever general gets to Berlin first leading their armies would end up being the head of the entire like Eastern forces, which is pretty cool. Now, as we come along underneath these columns, you get an even better look again of all the damage that's done to them, but it also allows us to have a view over to the front of the Old National Gallery. And there we have none other than Frederick William IV. This guy who's on the horse that you're about to see is the gentleman who wrapped himself in that flag of gold and black and red, and ultimately becomes the first revolutionary and empowers those revolutionaries, giving the first rights to Berliners who fought for them and died for those rights, to be honest with you. Behind the Old National Gallery, the Altes National Gallery, this red building, now you get a really good view of the Pergamon there. And you can see that glass ceiling. Now down below inside of that, what you actually have are three incredible pieces of history. Starting with the gates of Miletus, the old Roman gates. They're pretty neat. Then you have the Ishtar gates, and that's pretty amazing. They're really a wonder of the world. But finally, what gives the Pergamon Museum its name is the Pergamon altar, which was taken from ancient Greece, which today is part of Turkey. And the Germans went down and collected. They were great collectors of things in the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. Some people would say they had sticky fingers as they kind of collected things and brought them back here to Berlin from North Africa, from the Near East, the Far East, and eventually a lot of it ends up inside of the Pergamon Museum. So you don't have to go to Turkey today to be able to see the Pergamon altar. You come to Berlin instead, which is pretty fantastic. In front of the Pergamon, you've got the new museum, the Neues Museum. Its big claim to fame is the bust of Nefertiti, which is definitely worth visiting as well. Now, if this is the new museum, you got to be asking yourself, Chris, where is the old museum? The old museum is right over here. but this is not the best view of it. So instead of talking about the old museum, why don't we walk a little bit closer to the center of Museum Island and take a look at the Berliner Dom. And hopefully neither Manu nor myself will get run over. All right, fantastic. Now, Manu, could I get you to spin up in this direction as we walk towards the Berliner Dom? And that way we really get a good view of that. The Berliner Dom, which is the old Hohenzollern Royal Cathedral, the Hohenzollerns were the kings and queens and princes of Prussia. They're the ones that come here and kick the Slavic pagans out to kind of start with. And this building shows you a great example of a building which was badly damaged in World War II, because it shows you the old brick and the new brick really clearly. Vielen Dank dafür. Es tut mir leid. Danke sehr. What you can see is that old dark-colored brick there is the original stuff. It's the stuff that's been sucking in the air from Berlin for a long time. All of that kind of smoke and smog and cooking fires and coal ovens and the rest of it. And the light-colored brick, well, it's just it hasn't gotten that old yet. Now, they could have polished the old stuff and made the old stone look fresh and light as well, but eventually the new stuff will darken up and look like the old stuff, so you might as well just wait. But what it really shows us, especially up towards the top of the building where the cupola is, you can see the real light colored there. And the reason why that's so neat is because it helps me tell a story about World War II bombing specifically. Now, some people go, oh my gosh, Chris, why were the Allied forces trying to blow up churches? They weren't, absolutely not. And the reason why they weren't trying to blow up churches was because churches were amazing reference points. When you're flying over without radar and you're an RAF pilot, you can see the big church and you know that the tank factory is over here and the ammunition dump is over there. So as long as the church remains intact, you have a frame of reference for where you're going to drop your bombs. So you wouldn't really want to drop them on the church. So it's an accidental bombing that takes out this church specifically. The types of bombs they were using in those days weren't the type that would just hit something and just blow up like they used to. Instead, they'd have kind of a hard snub nose over the top of them. So they'd be able to be building busters. They'd break through the roof of a building, and once they were inside, all of that force had nowhere to go, except through the walls. So once the bomb went through the roof still looked great for a 1 count, 2 count, 3 count, and then boom, the roof blew off. And that's the story of the top of this old church. The bottom of the old church is where you can go and see a mausoleum full of those old royal family members. Everyone except for the last of them, really, because the last family member, William II, Kaiser William II, he's the one that had to abdicate the throne at the end of World War II, the end of World War I, as part of the Treaty of Versailles. He ends up going to the Netherlands, dies there, and he's still there, right? They haven't brought him back. But now a great time for us to first look out onto the this pleasure garden, if you will, the Lustgarten. Lustgarten, if you're tuning in, guys, this isn't that kind of live experience. This is just what the Germans call this space, with no kind of sexual connotation or anything like that. It's simply a place where people come together, usually to sit on the grass and drink a beer or whatnot. But today it looks like there is a Zumba class happening, which is pretty neat. We might have to get involved. We'll see what happens. Now, the front of the old museum here at the Altes Museum, this is the first museum on Museum Island. We've seen a couple already, but this one very much representing the Prussians' intention to establish the sense that they are much like an old empire that used to be here. The Roman Empire, not here, well, here as well actually, but the Roman Empire, they use columns like this. The Greeks use columns. And the Prussians are trying to say, we're going to be around just as long as those guys. And that's why, it's hard not to dance to, man. That's why you have this particular design. But most importantly, the architect behind this building, Schinkel, he's the same guy that did the quadriga with the Iron Cross and the Eagle of War on top of the Brandenburg Gate. Same dude. This bowl right here used to be inside of this building. And German engineering, some of the best in the world. Unfortunately, they couldn't manage to get the bowl out so well. And as they were removing the bowl from the internal rotunda, it breaks. They had to put it all back together again. The break in the bowl, the crack isn't what I want to talk about. What I really want to talk about is more of these bullet holes. So can almost see, anytime you see a large concentration of bullet holes like this, do you don't think I should get into it? Right? No? No? More history, forget it, okay. I can feel it, but I can feel the groove, man. So you can almost imagine any time that you're gonna have all of these bullet holes like this, that you can imagine some German soldier kind of shooting back out from inside of here as the Russians are coming for them and they're firing all over the place. It's like a time warp for me each time, down through the mists of time. We're gonna move away from the Zumba class and head our way towards the River Spree to get to the other side of the museum island. But before we do that, we should look over in this direction and take a look at, finally, we've been talking about the royal family this whole time, the royal museum, we talked about their the royal mausoleum and the royal church, the Berliner Dom, and this over here is a replica or a recreation of the old palace, the old royal palace, the Berliner Schloss. Now, it's not the original. We will see a piece of the original in just 1 second, the only last piece which is still around to see. But this palace replaced a different palace, the Palais de la République, which had been built in the place of the original Schloss by the East German government. And the Palais de la République, the Palace of the Republic, was the East German center of power. It's where they ran the country from. And after the end of the Cold War, after the end of the DDR, German reunification, which took place 30 years ago tomorrow, which is amazing. They abandoned that building. It sat empty for a while because it was really hard to deconstruct. Had a lot of asbestos inside and also had a really, really deep basement. Because this is an island and Berlin is a swamp, the water table on this island was so high that it meant that if you were to accidentally puncture the basements underneath the Palais de la République, all the water would flow in there, right? Lowering the water table and exposing the foundation of a lot of these old buildings, which, again, built on a swamp. They didn't pour concrete in there. They drove these big, thick wooden pylons down under the ground. And if that would be exposed, they'd start to rot. The buildings would start to shift. Hence, the reason why the Schloss isn't completed until very, very recently. Oh, here it is again. We're back to a river. It must be the Spree, right? The reason why Berlin is here, and it's showing us that we've really made our way across the museum island as we head over to the Royal Boulevard itself. You can see down to the Pergamon once again, but more importantly, you look across the street, you see this big pink building over here, which is the Zeughaus. Zeughaus was the old armory for the royal army, the royal family. And if you look up to the top of the Zeughaus, you see coats of arms, you see cannons and weaponry and the rest of it. Today it's the German Historical Society Museum, and well worth a visit, not just because it's German and history, which is pretty cool and something I feel really passionate about, but also because it's a really cool architectural space inside. So you're gonna have to wait, but when you do, geez, can't wait to have you guys here. Now, if you look down the river towards the bridge that we're headed to, this is the Schlossbrücke, the Palace Bridge. And it tells some early Prussian propaganda story, where in the far right-hand corner, what you have is a young Greek hero. I mean, he doesn't know he's a hero yet. He's just a little naked boy over there. And he starts to grow older, still naked, but he learns how to use his sword. And then over here, he learns how to use his spear. And then he learns knowledge, until eventually he's really lived the life of this Greek hero. And in this statue, they're all the same guy going through his life, right? This is the chronological statue right here. In the far left-hand corner, you can see him finally getting a laurel wreath wrapped around, put on his head. He's finally earned the right to wear clothing, and he is a real Greek hero. And he dies, right? Because that's the whole thing. You can't just live like a hero, you have to die like a hero. And this is to inspire all of those Prussian soldiers who are crossing back and forth across the Palace Bridge to protect the royal family, which is why they set these statues up. Now, if we can spin around really quick, Mano, and take a look at that piece of building right across the street. Now, you see the Schloss up here, right? The old reincarnation of the royal family's palace, but an actual real piece of the royal family's palace is down there. That's it, right? That's the section that doesn't kind of fit in with the rest of it, and that part is saved when they blow up, when the communists who take over blow up the rest of the palace that had been left over at the end of World War II, badly damaged. They could either spend a lot of money reconstructing it, or they could have torn it down. They tore it down. They saved that one piece, because that's where on November the 9th, 1918, Karl Liebknecht, communist leader, along with Rosa Luxemburg, they make an announcement announcing the creation of a new socialist communist republic. Little did he know that just a couple hours before, over on the steps of the Reichstag, the Weimar Republic was also announcing its new start. Well, didn't work out for Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. They ended up getting murdered by right-wing thugs and paramilitaries, kind of the predecessors of the Proud Boys, if you will. And they, Rosa Luxemburg's body is thrown in. We just crossed over in January of 1919. Her body floats back to the surface once the water thaws sometime in June, July. The building directly across the street right now is, or was at least, the Bertelsmann Media Building. The reason why I find it interesting for us to talk about is that it looks old. But it's not. How do you know, guys? Anybody? Anybody? No bullet holes, right? That's how you know. Because if it doesn't have bullet holes and it looks old, it's a fake. Why are there so many fake old-looking buildings? Because they're beautiful, and they reconstruct what this Royal Boulevard heading out towards the Royal Hunting Grounds past the Royal entrance and exit to the city, the Brandenburg Gate. It reconstructs what this boulevard would have looked like. Kind of the mastermind of none other than Schinkel, that Prussian architect, because he really developed this space to have a certain feel. This broad boulevard sense right now, right, gives you the sense that you are actually pretty small as you approach the Kaiser's home, right? And that diminutive nature for you, almost intimidating, gives you a grandiose expectation of the royal family. Ironically, it ends up saving Berlin from firebombing, because unlike Hamburg and Dresden, the Allies, they tried to bomb Berlin with firebombs as well, and incendiary explosions. The problem is that unlike those older cities of Dresden and Hamburg, Berlin's streets were so far apart, the buildings were so far apart across the boulevards, the fire couldn't really get started enough to jump the streets. And hence, Berlin, 90% destroyed in World War II, but never suffers that same sort of firestorm. Hey, can we take a quick look at this building one more time, Manu? Can we look at this guy? It's just worth pointing out right here, this is the Crown Prince's Palace. So it's the last of those royal palaces that we're going to see until we get to the Humboldt University at least. And this is where the guy who was next in line to take over his father's throne would have been waiting to eventually ascend to the palace across the bridge. There's another royal building, not a palace, but the old guardhouse, or the new guardhouse actually, the Neue Wache is what it's called. And it's coming up in front of us in just 1 second. You've got Doric columns up in, Doric columns in the front of that as well. Old Greek style frieze at the top. Again, that theme of we're going to be around for a long time, Prussia. So, don't expect us to go anytime soon. This building, having been an old guardhouse, so close to the armory and such, today is actually the home to none other than the memorial to the victims of war and tyranny. Now, it has been a memorial for a long time, all the way since since 1960 actually, when the East German communists create this space as a memorial to the victims of fascism. Fascism, they're talking about the Nazis, communists and Nazis, never really kind of got along, that's the right and the left. And then in 1969, they replace that kind of empty space with an eternal flame inside, because 69, it's on fire. And then today, what you have starting in the early 1990s is a statue by a woman named Käthe Kollwitz. Now, Käthe Kollwitz has a special connection to war and tyranny herself, because in World War II, she would lose her grandson and other family members, but in World War I, she lost her son, Peter. And her son was too young to go and serve in the army in World War I. But World War I in 1914, it's so soon after, like the first German imperial state in 1871, people are like really pumped up and excited about going into World War I. They think it's going to be over really fast. And the son goes to his father and says, "Hey, Dad, can I go and serve in the military? I'm too young. Will you sign the permission slip?" And Dad says, "Heck no. Get back to work." But he goes to his mom, Katakovitz, and says, Mom, come on, Ma, it's going to be a quick battle, and I want to come back with honors and rewards. Can I go and serve in the army? And she says yes. She signs the permission slip. Soon after that, in Belgium, he's killed. And she never forgives herself. She becomes a devout pacifist after that, which is why the statue inside today makes so much sense for us to be able to talk about. It's closed right now because we're a little bit later in the evening, but we can still get a great view inside. If you take a look right now, what you'll see is a mother holding her dead or dying son. It's hard not to think of the Jesus and his mother's story, and if you look up above, you can see a hole through the roof. Now, when it rains, it actually looks like she's crying. That raindrops come down from her face and drip down onto that soldier, that son in her arms. When it snows, she wears a blanket of snow. It's one of the most beautiful reasons to walk around in Berlin in the winter, just to see that when it's snowing. So as we continue down into the Linden, across the street, we can see a big pink building over there. That is the old Staatsoper, the Royal Opera House. It's one of 3 opera houses in Berlin, which is pretty cool because Berlin, with only 3.5 million people, maybe 4.5 million unofficially, has 3 opera houses. That's a lot of opera. But one last thing to see right over here on the Neue Wache is just a little hidden trick, a little hidden secret, if you will. You take a look, you can see here, what do you see? You see patched up bullet holes again. So you know this part is old. But this part up here, this brick, this is new. This is part of the reconstruction. Brick is much cheaper than this nice, heavy, old rock down here. And the reason why this is brick is because East Germany would have people coming across Checkpoint Charlie during the time of the divided city, and you could come and visit, but they wouldn't let you out of your tourist bus after you'd crossed over into the east. Part of it was so that you wouldn't meet East Germans and they couldn't tell you how awesome it was to live here. But part of it also was so that you wouldn't go behind the facades of these buildings and see actually how poorly reconstructed they'd been. The DDR was definitely not 2 things. It wasn't very democratic and it wasn't wealthy. So a quick fix like that made a lot of sense for those folks. As we walk down the Royal Boulevard, we're coming to another building that used to be an old palace, but today houses the Humboldt University. And the Humboldt University is a university, one of 3 big universities in Berlin, along with the Free University and the Technical University. The Humboldt, however, probably is the most prestigious in many ways because, well, it's had some pretty famous people attend school here. The brothers Grimm went here. Einstein was affiliated with the university, despite being Jewish, which was something that usually you wouldn't be able to get a seat, a chair in a department if you were a Jew. But Berlin was a pretty open-minded place before the Nazis show up. And in front of the Humboldt University, you can see 2 of those famous Humboldt brothers. This is Alexander, and then his brother down there, William. William was the founder of the university. Alexander spent a lot of time in South America. Are we going to try to run for this light? Is that what's happening? You want to go for it? All right, we're going to run for this light because Manu is telling me that I'm talking slowly today. And that's because I'm a little tired. You know, guys, yesterday afternoon, I drank a lot of coffee in the afternoon, and I don't really drink coffee later in the day. The result for me was that I didn't get to sleep until 3 in the morning because I was just so jazzed from my first tour yesterday, and a fair amount of caffeine still in my system. Really quick, worth just pointing out this guy up on the horse because I promised I would before. That's Frederick the Great, Frederick II, der Alte Fritz, as they call him here. He was the military leader who most expanded Prussia by military conquest. He was a genius. In fact, in many military handbooks, even today, there'll still be references to Frederick the Great and the work that he did. His real claim to fame for me was that he used to ride into battle with his troops wearing a red shirt. Why a red shirt? Not a white shirt. A red shirt because if he got shot, right, and his blood would come out onto the shirt, his troops wouldn't be demoralized because they couldn't tell that the king had been shot. This is often why historians argue the Nazis wore brown pants. Same sort of argument to hide things. So speaking of Nazis, it's worth just doing a quick turn around this square here, which is Bebelplatz, which is where the book burning took place. But before we talk about the book burning, got to tell you these other buildings. This is also a Humboldt University building, the law faculty building. This one over here, the Staatsoper, like we were saying, built by von Knobelsdorff, right? G.W. von Knobelsdorff, great name for an architect. He also is responsible for this Catholic church in the corner, St. Hedwig's Cathedral. But Chris, didn't you say yesterday that Berlin was like a Protestant headquarters, like the Lutherans were here? Yes, it's true, but Berlin was also a very forward-thinking and progressive city that welcomed Jews, welcomed Protestants, welcomed Catholics, really kind of welcomed everyone that could bring something, bring a skill or a trade into the city. Now, that's all well and good until May 10th, 1933, because this is where the site of the book burning is in 33. You couldn't tell that, really. It doesn't look like there's a memorial here, but there is one. It's just one that you can't see until you're right on top of it. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Very nice people giving us a little room so that you folks at home can come and see this really cool memorial. Now, coming out of the ground, turn around, take a look, here it comes. Oh yeah, you look down through this glass plate and what do you see? Underground, right? We don't see it until we get right on top of it. And what this is are empty bookshelves. Empty bookshelves. Enough space to be able to fill all of these shelves in here with all the books that were burned on May 10th, 1933 by National Socialist students who went around to the universities around us, the university library around us, and to private libraries, and they pulled out the books that were deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. Books by Jews, books by socialists and communists, books by anyone that they didn't agree with. And they threw them into this fire pit that night. And there's a plaque over here, which is something that I very well may be ending our tour on in just a second, depending upon how we're doing for time, Manu. The plaque here says, in the middle of the square, on the 10th of May, 1933, National Socialists, that's Nationalsozialisten, and you shorten that to Nazis. Nazi students burned the works of hundreds of journalists, publicists, philosophers, and scientists. On this side of the plaque, it speaks to Mika Ullmann, the Jewish architect who built this memorial called Bibliothek, basically library in every language besides English. And there's a quote here at the top from Heinrich Heine. He was a German Jew who wrote this play, this quote is taken from, in 1820. And just to really draw your attention to that, the Nazi Party won't exist for at least 100 years after this is written. This book burning takes place in 1933, and this quote, written in 1820, says this: "When you start by burning books, you end by burning people." And that was only the beginning. It's some pretty intense foreshadowing for us for what would end up coming. Not to leave you on that kind of note, because it shouldn't be one of hopelessness. It should instead be actually one of hopefulness. It's hopefulness because of the way that Germany remembers its past. Germans remember their history, because if you don't, right, you're destined to repeat your history. And that's why memorials like this, not so in your face, not forcing you to come and have them pound you in the head, are here for you to discover in a way for yourself. It's not that they're hidden or anything, it's just that what you learn for yourself, you will learn that much better in many ways. That's why it's always been such a great honor for me to be able to live in Berlin in the past and do tours here, and to be back here doing tours right now. The history is amazing, but also the way the history is remembered by the people who live and run this country is incredibly special. Well, guys, what are we at? Is that time? Okay, we're done. That's another 30 somewhat odd minute tour, and there'll soon be another one to come. Look, if you felt like it was worth paying for, if you felt like you got some value out of this, I greatly appreciate you testing our new payment method, which I guess is with Stripe instead of with PayPal today. We'll see if that works any better than things worked yesterday. All the proceeds that come from this go directly to supporting the company, which has had a really tough time of it during the pandemic. Not just, the business, the guides, the whole thing. The whole industry has been hurt, and it's really been a shame in a way. But at the same time, right, from every crisis comes opportunity, and the opportunity here is for us to be able to reach so many more people than we would have been able to before, including you. So I guess that's going to be us for tonight. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a real pleasure. I'm Chris Sandeman from Berlin, signing off.